In early 2012, in a Bayou community in Assumption Parish, people started reporting that the water was bubbling. Then came tremors nobody could explain. Officials spent more than 2 months looking for a cause. The company operating underneath denied there was any real danger. And in August, the swamp opened up and swallowed the cypress trees standing in it. That is where this list begins. The place is called Bayou Corn. And it is not the strangest thing hiding in coastal Louisiana. That place makes this list. So do 9 others. A brick fort from the 1,850 seconds, standing alone in open water, a foot deep, with no land around it in any direction. 100 concrete angels on a narrow strip of bayou mud, built by a bricklayer who walked away in January 2000 and has never been seen since. A lake that drained itself into a salt mine in a single morning and took 11 barges with it. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because that story is number 1 on this list. It is a 2-lane road with open water on both shoulders, running out to an island that has lost 98% of itself. If you like places the maps have quietly given up, unsubscribe. That is most of what we do here. Today, we are counting down 10 things the Louisiana Bayou is hiding. Number 10. Rayne, the town that sold frogs to Paris. Start about 2 hours west of New Orleans on flat rice and crawfish prairie in Acadia Parish. Rayne has 7,236 people, and by the city's own count, more than 130 frog statues. The town exists because a railroad stopped there in the late 1,800 seconds, and the railroad is the entire explanation for what happened next. A Parisian named Jacques Weil and his brothers worked out that the marshes and rice fields around Rayne produced enormous bullfrogs, and that restaurants in France would pay serious money for them. They built a cage pen capable of holding 15,000 frogs at once. They added frog leather goods. They shipped to Chicago, to Los Angeles, and reportedly to Paris. The Louisiana Frog Company moved into Rayne in 1933 and stopped shipping in 1973. The industry is gone. The frogs are not. About 24 murals cover the downtown buildings, earning the town a second nickname, City of Murals. There is an annual festival with frog races and jumping contests. And in 1970, NASA put 2 bullfrogs from Rayne into orbit to study the effect of weightlessness on the inner ear. According to the Parish Tourism Office, Rayne's Saint-Tine, Joseph Cemetery is listed in Ripley's, believe it or not, as the only known cemetery in the United States laid out north to south rather than east to west. The accidental result of the whole town shifting to sit closer to the tracks. Even the dead in Rayne are facing the wrong way. Number 9. Morgan City, where Tarzan was born. The first Tarzan film ever made was not shot in Africa, and it was not shot in Hollywood. It was shot in a Louisiana swamp. In the spring of 1917, location scouts working for producer William Parsons went looking for somewhere in America that could pass for equatorial Africa on black and white film. They settled on the country around Morgan City on the edge of the Atchafalaya Basin, where they could get Spanish moss, cypress, open water, and dense semi-tropical growth in a single frame. It was a cost decision. Nothing more. Tarzan of the Apes was released on the 27th of January, 1918. Tickets normally ran 5 to 7 cents that year, and people paid up to $2.50 to see it. The film grossed roughly $1.5 million and still ranks among the 10 most successful pictures of the silent era. It also made Morgan City the first place in America outside New York or California where a feature film was shot on location. There was enough unused footage left over that the sequel was cut from it, which means the first 2 Tarzan movies were both in effect filmed here. Palmetto huts were built at Lake End Park for the production and then burned on camera. The park is still a public park, and for about a century, locals have passed down a rumor that the production released its monkeys into the swamp when filming wrapped. El Bull. The filmmaker, who spent 4 years researching the movie, doubts the wildest version. Chimps, he points out, are far too dangerous to turn loose, but he concedes that smaller monkeys may well have been. Nobody in Morgan City seems especially interested in ruling it out. Number 8. Fort Proctor, the fort that never fought. About 30 miles southeast of New Orleans, past the fishing settlement of Shell Beach, there is a square brick fortress standing in the middle of Lake Borgne. It has no dry land. Water sits about a foot deep inside the walls. It was built between 1856 and 1859, one of the last of 42 coastal forts Congress authorized after the British sailed into Washington in 1814 and burned it. Construction was supervised by P.G.T. Beauregard, the man who would go on to order the first shots of the Civil War. Proctor was meant to block a shallow back route through Lake Borgne toward New Orleans alongside Forts Macomb and Pike. It used poured concrete and rolled iron, I-beams, which was advanced work for the era. It was never finished, and it was never used as planned. Gunnery outran masonry, and the fort was strategically pointless before it was even complete. Then the land started leaving. When it was built, it sat roughly 150 feet back from the shoreline, with a rail port called Proctorville beside it. Hurricanes ate the shore decade by decade. In the 1,960 seconds, the Army Corps dredged the Mississippi River Gulf outlet behind it and severed the last land access for good. The Library of Congress puts it plainly. The fort's position in the lake reflects the eroding condition of the Louisiana coast. It was listed on the National Register in 1978. It survived Hurricane Katrina, passing directly over it. A rock levee now rings it to break the waves, and the water still gets in. Kayakers who make the crossing wade through that standing water inside the walls, occasionally sinking shin deep. They have found a homemade wooden ladder in there, probably left by one of the teenagers who used the ruins as a hangout back in the 1940s and 50s, when you could still walk to it. Nothing dramatic ever happened to Fort Proctor. The land just walked off and left it standing there. Number 7. The Chauvin Sculpture Garden. The man who built 100 angels and vanished. In 1988, a bricklayer arrived alone in the shrimping village of Chauvin, 60 miles from where he had been living, having left a wife and 3 children behind. His name was Kenny Hill. He is believed to have been born around 1950, though no birth certificate has ever been found. He rented a narrow bayou side lot for $250 a year. He pitched a tent on it, then built himself a small house by hand. In 1990, without explaining himself to his landlord, his neighbors, or anyone else, he started building sculptures. Over the next decade, he filled the property with life-size concrete figures, angels, cowboys, soldiers, musicians, eagles, and at least 7 versions of himself. The centerpiece is a 45-foot lighthouse made of 7,000 bricks, studded with figures in relief, including the flag raising at Iwo Jima. All of it brightly painted, all of it built for no money and no audience. The art professor who eventually found the site, Dennis Sipierski of Nicholls State, spoke to Hill shortly before the end, asked whether the place was his vision. Hill said it was about living and life and everything he had learned. He would not sell a single piece. In January 2000, he was evicted, not for rent, but for failing to keep the grass and weeds down. He left on foot, abandoning his possessions. Nobody has heard from him since. Above his kitchen sink, he had painted a sign in red. It read, "Hell is here, welcome." The land was gifted to Nicholls State University, the Kohler Foundation funded conservation, and the garden opened to the public in 2002. Hurricane Ida hit it directly in 2021. It is still open, still maintained, still used to teach school children. 100 concrete angels, and the only man who knew what they meant walked out of the state. Number 6. The Isles Derniers. They were dancing when it came. On the evening of Saturday, the 9th of August, 1856. A ball was held at Mugga's Hotel, on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico. Guests were uneasy. The breeze that had come up Friday was a gale by Saturday, but the ball went ahead and broke up sometime after midnight. By the following night, roughly half the people in that room were dead. Ile Dernière, last island, sat about 5 miles off the Terrebonne Parish coast. It was 24 miles long, at points barely a mile wide, and stood around 5 feet above sea level. Starting in the 1840s, wealthy Louisianans built roughly 100 summer homes there to escape the heat and the yellow fever seasons of New Orleans. Steamboats ran a regular route down. Muggett's Hotel had a restaurant, a ballroom, bowling and billiards. There was a carousel. August was the busiest month, which is exactly why the death toll was what it was. There was no warning system. By Sunday, the only way off the island was the ferry steamer, and it could not get there. The hurricane came ashore at full force around 3 in the afternoon on the 10th of August, with winds estimated near 150 miles an hour and a surge of 11 to 12 feet that covered the island completely. The hotel began collapsing, with guests sheltering upstairs. At least 198 people died on the island. Another 183 drowned offshore when ships went down in the same storm. The island was split in 2. Over time, it broke into 5. A steamer captain named Michael Schlottery lived through it by clinging to a piece of a house and washing north into the marshes. His wife, 7 children, and several servants all drowned. He and an elderly man named Mill survived on that wreckage for more than a week, eating raw mussels and oysters and drinking rainwater. Before paddling back toward the island to be found, Mill died shortly after the rescue. What is left is a state wildlife refuge you cannot land on without a permit. Between 1887 and 2002, the chain lost 82.2% of its land. In 1962, the local rodeo club installed a 6-foot Carrara marble virgin at Whiskey Pass to watch over returning fishermen. The sea took the ground out from under her 3 times. They dragged her inland in 1967, raised her onto 60-foot pilings in 1982, and finally moved her 16 miles inland for good. Even the statue had to retreat. Number 5. Leville, the town under the bridge. Here's the thing about Leville. Louisiana did not build a highway around it. Louisiana built a highway over it, on concrete piers, because there was no longer enough ground down there to lay road on. Leville sits on Bayou Lafourche, south of Golden Meadow, and it started as a farming and fishing settlement on solid ground. Locals now find the farming part hard to picture. It is not dying of one thing. It is dying of a sequence. In the 1930 seconds, oil prospectors arrived. Doodle-bugging, one resident called it. And by the 1940 seconds, hundreds of derricks crowded the horizon. Everything moved by water, so canals were dredged wider and wider, cutting the marsh into ribbons and letting salt water in behind them. The marsh that held the land together died. The Mississippi sediment, meanwhile, was locked behind levees upriver and never came down to replace it. Then, 5 major hurricanes in 7 years, and the BP spill on top of that. Around 70% of the wetlands around Leville have vanished since 1932. The elevated bridge went up in 2009. In 2022, a $135 million project began to extend it further north to Golden Meadow. Today, the traffic runs to the oil port overhead without touching the town at all. The cemeteries went first. Julian Lefort and his brother Elfrage started a small family cemetery here at the turn of the 20th century. It is largely underwater now. The Esponge Cemetery is gone entirely. A pipeline company built a bulkhead around it in about 1930, and that washed away years ago. At low tide, you can still see some tomb bases. At Leville Cemetery, they poured concrete over the graves to hold them down, and high tides still cover it. A local boatman named Talbot finds the drowned graves by leaning over the side and stabbing a stick into the soft bayou bottom until it taps something solid. Then he splashes handfuls of bayou water onto the stone until the letters come back. Francois Guilbeault died the 24th of January, 1901, aged 99 years. He has to wash a headstone with the water that took it. We opened this video with Bayou Corn. Let us know in the comments if that one caught you off guard. If you're enjoying the deep dive so far, a thumbs up genuinely helps more people find these stories. Fair warning, the last four get heavier. Number 4. Peigneur, Ruddock, and Napton. 3 towns, 1 funeral. Between Lake Morpeth and Lake Pontchartrain, there is a low isthmus of cypress swamp. Ruddock's recorded elevation is 3 feet. 3 settlements existed out there for one reason: the timber and the railroad. Peigneur was founded in 1836 by descendants of German colonists and grew cabbage, beets, potatoes, and lettuce, shipping it out on the Illinois Central. Ruddock was a company town built by the Ruddock Cypress Company around a sawmill. By 1910, it had 700 people, a telegraph office, a post office, a boarding house, and a saloon. The third settlement, Wagram, was later renamed Napton. The railroad was their only reliable link to anywhere. They had already been punished repeatedly. A fire destroyed the Ruddock Mill in 1902. The rebuilt mill was wrecked 7 years later by a cyclone that brought 15-foot storm tides. By 1915, the entire town of Peigneur consisted of 3 houses. 1 belonged to George Schlosser. 1 belonged to an African-American family whose name was not recorded. And 1 belonged to Julia Brown. She was a black herbalist and community traiteuse, the person people came to when they were sick. She was also remembered for a song she sang on her porch, a line about how one day she would die and take the whole town with her. She died in late September 1915. Her funeral drew people from miles around, and the Times-Picayune noted her as a well-known and substantial property owner in that part of the parish. The funeral was underway on the 29th of September, when a Category 4 hurricane came ashore. The surge came up out of Lake Pontchartrain. Residents sheltered in the schoolhouse and the railroad depot, and the depot was torn apart around them. Accounts of how many died vary widely, and the honest answer is that nobody agrees. When rescuers reached the isthmus on the 1st of October, all 3 towns were gone. Buildings flattened, miles of track washed away, along with the very rails that would have brought help. Nobody rebuilt. Today, the Manchac Swamp Bridge runs directly over the site, 22.8 miles of twin concrete trestle, opened in 1979, with piles driven 250 feet down into the swamp at $7 million a mile. It is the longest bridge on the interstate highway system. About 2,200 vehicles cross it a day. There is an exit sign for Ruddock. There has been nothing at Ruddock for 110 years. Number 3. Bayou Corn. The swamp that swallowed itself. We started with this one, so here is the rest of it. Under the swamp at Bayou Corn sits the Napoleonville Salt Dome. For decades, companies had been dissolving caverns into it to produce brine. The cavern that mattered was operated by the Texas Brine Company and owned by Occidental Chemical, roughly 300 feet across and more than 3,000 feet deep. Court testimony would later establish that it had been considered unstable from its early days. Texas Brine plugged it in 2011. Through the first half of 2012, residents reported bubbling in the bayou and then underground tremors. State officials spent more than 2 months unable to explain either. As the symptoms worsened in late July, Texas Brine officially denied that a sinkhole was likely. On the night of the 2nd of August, the cavern's sidewall gave way. By morning, there was a watery hole in the woods, about 300 feet from the bayou's edge. Officials declined to call it a sinkhole. They called it a slurry hole. Governor Bobby Jindal ordered an evacuation on the 3rd of August after residents reported the smell of crude oil throughout the community, roughly 350 people in about 159 homes. It kept growing. It reached 34 to 37 acres, with a depth of at least 750 feet. Here is the detail that stops people cold. It did not swallow houses. It swallowed the swamp. Ancient sediment and full-grown standing cypress trees dropped 750 feet into the ground, and what is left is so completely ringed by surviving cypress that it could pass for any other lake in Louisiana if not for the containment levee. In 2018, a state judge found that Texas brine, Occidental, and Vulcan materials had ignored warnings about the cavern going back to 1976 and had put economic concerns over environmental and safety concerns. Fault was apportioned 50% to Occidental, 35% to Texas brine, 15% to Vulcan. Texas brine says it has spent more than $150 million in response and maintains its actions alone did not cause it. The last evacuation orders came off in October 2016. By 2018, a community of 350 was down to slightly more than a dozen. People moved to Bayou Corn because it was quiet. It is quieter now. Number 2. Lake Peigneur. The day they pulled the plug. On the morning of the 20th of November 1980, a drilling crew put a 14-inch bit through the roof of a working salt mine from a platform floating on top of a lake. Lake Peigneur sits about 9 miles west of New Iberia. It covered 1,125 acres and was 10 or 11 feet deep, a pleasant freshwater lake holding an estimated 3.5 billion gallons. Beneath it, the Diamond Crystal Salt Company had been mining since 1919, cutting rooms down to 1,500 feet, leaving pillars of salt in place to hold the ceilings up. Above it, Texaco held the drilling lease and had subcontracted Wilson Brothers to look for oil around the flank of the dome. Both companies knew the other was there. Around 9 that morning, the 7-man crew found their bits stuck at about 1,230 feet. Working it loose, they heard a series of loud pops, and the rig began tilting toward the water. Down in the mine, an electrician named Junius Gaddison was checking wire at the 1,300-foot level when he heard banging and saw a muddy stream more than 2 feet deep coming toward him. He raised the alarm. About 50 men were underground, some 500 feet below him, and they got out on mine carts and an elevator that carried 8 at a time. Every one of them made it. Nobody died. Nobody was seriously hurt. Freshwater dissolves salt, so the hole did not stay a hole. A whirlpool, a quarter of a mile across, opened up and took the rig. A second drilling platform, 11 barges, a tugboat, a dock, a house trailer, and roughly 65 acres of surrounding land. The Delcombre Canal reversed direction, and a 50-foot waterfall formed as the Gulf poured backward into the crater to fill it. Within 2 days, the lake had refilled, and 9 of the barges popped back up, largely intact. Texaco and Wilson Brothers paid $32 million to the salt company and another $12.8 million to the gardens on the island. A federal report the following August documented all of it and stopped short of naming an official cause. Salt mining at Jefferson Island never resumed. A house went down the hole with everything else. Its brick chimney still stands above the surface, out in the middle of the water. Louisiana's deepest lake is 200 feet deep because somebody drilled in the wrong place. Number 1, Île de Jean Charles. The island that lost 98% of itself. The road is 2 lanes wide with open water on both shoulders. There is no tree cover out here, so the wind comes straight across and does not stop. Gulls. Almost no traffic. In places, the water is over the asphalt and you drive through it, because there is no other way in. At the end of the road are houses on stilts, some of them wrecked, some of them lived in. This ridge of land in Terrebonne Parish once covered more than 22,000 acres. About 320 remain. The community is here because nobody else wanted the ground. Around 1830, Biloxi, Chitimacha, and Choctaw families went deep into the Bayou country, rather than be marched west under Indian removal, and they settled a narrow ridge that white settlement had no use for. They fished, farmed oysters, trapped, and grew what they needed. Isolation kept them safe for well over a century. Then, The same industries that made South Louisiana profitable took the island apart. Leville's upriver stopped the Mississippi from laying down new sediment. Oil was found in the area in 1929, and the canals dredged for drilling let salt water into the marsh. The wetlands died, the ground subsided, and the water came in behind it. The island has lost 98% of its land since 1955. Island Road was built in 1953. Before that, the only reliable way in, the road floods on wind alone, not just storms, and when it floods, nothing gets through. No ambulance, no fire truck. There is one fire station on the island, and one person certified in CPR. School children used to be taken to the mainland by boat or simply miss school until the water dropped. In 2016, Louisiana won a $92 million federal grant, and $48 million of it went into moving the community. And the Louisiana Land Trust bought 515 acres of farmland near Schriever for $11.7 million, about 40 miles north. In November 2019, residents voted to call it the New Isle. It was the first federally funded climate resettlement in the country. Move-in began in August 2022, and fewer than half of the 37 expected households could actually take possession that day. Drainage problems, unfinished construction. Tribal leadership supported members' individual choices while raising concerns about not being consulted. As late as November 2024, people were still reporting construction problems with the new houses. The first closing went to an islander named Chris Brunet. He said it was the first time in his life he had signed something with that many regulations attached to living somewhere. After the paperwork, Chief Naquin smudged the house, burning sacred herbs to cleanse it. Brunet said the day felt less like a celebration than a choice he had to make. Some people did not go. They are still out at the end of that road, with the wind coming across it from both sides at once, watching the water get closer to the asphalt every year. There are more of these than we could fit. Chenier Caminada, where an 1893 hurricane killed 779 of about 1,471 residents, did not make the list and easily could have. My own favorite is Fort Proctor because nothing dramatic ever happened to it. The land simply left. Which one surprised you and which one did we miss? Subscribe if you want more of these.